All right, let's dive into Indonesia's security landscape this week.
Sounds good.
We're going beyond just the headlines. We're
Yeah.
looking at official reports, military updates, and even what's buzzing on social media.
Getting the full picture.
Exactly.
It's a complex landscape constantly changing, and digital threats are becoming just as important as the traditional security issues.
Right, and that's actually where I wanted to start.
Okay.
The fight against terrorism, it seems like it's evolving.
It really is.
The battleground is shifting online.
Yeah, the National Counterterrorism Agency, BNTT, they're reporting a pretty significant decline in those open terrorist attacks.
That's good.
Since 2018, in fact, this year, 2024, we haven't seen any recorded attacks.
It is encouraging.
Yeah, it's a positive trend.
So what's the catch, though? You mentioned like a shift to the digital world.
Exactly. While those physical attacks are down, there's been an alarming surge in online content that promotes terrorist ideologies.
Okay.
BNPT, they've identified over 10,000 pieces of this content, circulating on platforms like Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, even WhatsApp.
10,000 pieces of content. That's a
Yeah.
lot. What do we talk about here? What kind of content?
It's everything from propaganda and recruitment calls to even instructions on how to carry out attacks.
Oh, wow.
And what's really worrying is they're increasingly targeting vulnerable groups.
Oh, no.
Specifically women and children.
Right.
They're more susceptible to those radicalization tactics online.
Yeah, it's kind of disturbing to think about the long-term consequences of young people being exposed to that kind of content.
It really is. The BNPT, they're emphasizing the urgency for the government to step in and take some preventative measures to combat this growing digital threat. And one legislator even pointed to over 9,640 pieces of content that were specifically calling for opposition to the Indonesian state.
So it's targeted, it's organized
Very much
to
so.
incite unrest. That's kind of a chilling thought.
It is.
It makes those recent activities of Densus 88 even more relevant.
Yes.
That's Indonesia's elite counterterrorism unit.
Absolutely. There are recent arrests of 3 suspected terrorists
Okay.
in Kudus, Demak, and Solo. Those are noteworthy.
Tell me more about these arrests.
Well, the locations themselves are interesting because they're not typically hotbeds for terrorist activity.
Right.
The suspect in Kudus, for example, he was known for avoiding communal activities, which might have been a bit of a red flag.
So individuals operating under the radar, possibly radicalized online.
Yeah.
I mean, these arrests make you wonder, are they just isolated incidents or are we looking at a pattern here?
It's a really crucial question and something we definitely need to keep an eye on.
For sure. So let's shift gears a little bit from the digital battlefield
Okay.
to some more traditional military developments.
Yeah.
We've seen some interesting shifts in Indonesia's international alliances lately.
Yeah, they just concluded a joint military exercise with India.
Okay.
It was called Garuda Shakti 24.
Okay.
And this exercise involved elite forces from both countries,
Got it.
the Indian Parachute Regiment and the Indonesian Kopassus.
Interesting. So I understand this exercise focused on some pretty specific skills.
It did.
What was the objective there?
Well, the focus was really on jungle warfare and counterterrorism operations, which are pretty relevant given Indonesia's terrain.
Of course.
The goal was to enhance cooperation, interoperability, and understanding between these special forces units.
Really essential when you're dealing with these complex security threats in a region like Southeast Asia.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting to look at this exercise within the bigger picture of Indonesia's military partnerships.
Right.
They recently also held their very first ever naval drills with Russia.
Wow, so it seems like Indonesia is really strategically broadening these military engagements.
Yeah.
I mean, is this a signal of a shift in their foreign policy under President Prabowo? Maybe moving towards like a more multi-aligned approach?
It's a good question. President Prabowo's background as a former military general kind of adds another layer to this analysis.
For sure, especially given his focus on strengthening the TNI, Indonesia's armed forces.
And speaking of the TNI, there have been some pretty significant internal shifts recently.
Like what?
Over 60 high-ranking officers have been rotated.
Wow, we know those rotations are standard procedure, but
The timing is interesting, especially considering President Prabowo's emphasis on national integrity and a strong military.
so it raises some eyebrows.
It does. Could these changes be an attempt to shape the TNI to align with his vision? Maybe ensure their loyalty, or are we seeing signs of political influence creeping into the military?
That's a good question.
These are questions analysts are thinking about.
Yeah.
Especially with the TNI's recent efforts to kind of boost their public image through these social media campaigns.
Right.
It's almost as if they're trying to control the narrative.
Yeah.
Especially when incidents come up that could tarnish their reputation.
Like those allegations reported by Turdo.ide?
Exactly.
About the TNI's involvement in COVID-19 medication production?
Right, even though that report was later deleted.
Yeah, it raises questions about transparency and accountability.
It does.
And whether these internal shifts are about aligning with Prabowo's goals or consolidating power within the military.
Right. We need to stay vigilant and really observe these developments closely.
Speaking of vigilance, let's talk about this growing issue of misinformation.
Oh, okay.
There's a new report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS.
Right.
And it underscores the dangers of misinformation, particularly with the upcoming 2024 election.
Yes. The report really highlights Indonesia's vulnerabilities to misinformation.
Okay.
They cite factors like low digital literacy and that potent mix of identity politics,
Right.
which can be very easily manipulated.
And to make matters worse, the report points to the involvement of media workers themselves in spreading misinformation.
It's true. The report cites specific examples of how these misinformation campaigns have played out.
Okay, you mean example?
Remember those rumors about a possible election postponement?
Oh, yeah, right.
And the controversy around Jokowi's college diploma?
It seems like every election cycle has its own fabricated scandals.
Exactly. These fabricated stories often tap into societal anxieties,
Right.
making them more believable and more shareable.
Right.
The report also highlights this false narrative about an influx of Chinese workers, which played on existing xenophobic sentiment.
Right. So the CSIS report argues that all of this combined with Indonesia's specific vulnerabilities creates a perfect storm for misinformation to flourish.
It does, and that's why it's a national security threat.
Okay.
Misinformation can fuel social unrest, erode trust in institutions,
Wow.
and ultimately destabilize the country.
So it's a threat that's every bit as real as any traditional security challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From the evolving landscape of counterterrorism efforts to the complexities of international military alliances, and then this insidious threat of misinformation.
It really highlights the multifaceted nature of security in the 21st century.
For sure.
Traditional threats are still there, but they're all intertwined with these new digital challenges.
Making the situation even more intricate.
And more difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
So let's take a step back for a second and discuss what all of this means for Indonesia going forward.
Well, Indonesia's facing this delicate balancing act.
Okay.
On one hand, there's a need to strengthen national security.
Right.
Counter those real threats, both physical and digital.
But on the other hand,
they need to uphold those democratic values.
right.
Like freedom of speech, a vibrant civil society,
Yeah.
and limits on political influence, especially when it comes to sensitive institutions like the military.
It's a tough line to walk.
It is.
How can Indonesia find that balance? How can they ensure security without sacrificing those core democratic principles?
That's the million-dollar question.
It really is.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's a question that goes beyond Indonesia's borders.
Yeah.
The world is grappling with this new era of security challenges.
Yeah.
Where those digital threats are just as potent as the physical ones.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to stay informed.
Yeah. Understand the nuances of these issues and be critical of the information we consume.
I couldn't agree more. And that brings us to our final takeaway for today.
All right.
We've seen how Indonesia is working to combat terrorism in this new digital age, how international alliances are being forged through military exercises,
Right.
and how internal shifts within the TNI might signal changing priorities under President Prabowo. But perhaps the most crucial takeaway is this threat of misinformation.
It's a big one.
It's a clear and present danger to Indonesia's security and stability.
It demands our attention.
Yeah.
We need to be vigilant, critical of what we see and hear online, and hold those in power accountable for spreading falsehoods.
Because ultimately, security isn't just about protecting our borders or combating terrorism.
Yeah.
It's about protecting the very fabric of our society, our values, our institutions, and our shared sense of reality.
Well said.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. If Indonesia is going to navigate these complex security challenges, both old and new, what role do you think its citizens should play?
That's a really powerful question to consider.
And it's a question that's relevant not just for Indonesia, but for all of us.
Yeah.
We're all living in this interconnected digital world. And the choices we make, the information we share, and the voices we amplify, they can have real consequences.
Absolutely. So as you continue to explore these themes, remember to stay engaged, stay informed, and stay vigilant against the ever-evolving threat of misinformation. Now, before we go, let's revisit some of the specific details from our sources that really stood out this week.
Okay, let's dive back into the BMPT's data on online terrorism content.
Right.
We mentioned they flagged over 10,000 pieces.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really concerning is that one legislator identified over 9,640 pieces, specifically calling for opposition to the Indonesian state.
Wow.
That's a very targeted message.
It is.
It suggests a level of organization and intent that's pretty chilling.
Absolutely. It highlights how online platforms can be exploited to disseminate those extremist ideologies and incite violence.
And it underscores the difficult task the BMPT faces in trying to monitor and counter this kind of content.
Yeah, they're not alone. Counterterrorism agencies around the world are grappling with similar challenges as the battleground shifts online.
Right. Shifting gears back to military developments, the Garuda Shakti 24 exercise between India and Indonesia, it wasn't just about those tactical skills.
Oh, no.
It was symbolic of the deepening ties between the two nations.
Exactly. And considering Indonesia also conducted its first naval drills with Russia this week, it does suggest a strategic move toward a more multi-aligned foreign policy.
So it's a balancing act.
It is.
Indonesia is clearly trying to strengthen its relationships with various global powers,
Right.
but without aligning itself too closely with any one bloc.
It's a strategic approach that reflects Indonesia's desire to maintain its independence and autonomy in this increasingly polarized world.
Within the TNI, we discussed those major personnel changes. Over 60 high-ranking officers rotated.
That's a significant shakeup.
Yeah, and it could be interpreted as President Prabowo consolidating his power.
Right.
And ensuring the TNI's loyalty.
Especially given his background as a former military general and his stated commitment to a stronger TNI.
Right, but it also raises concerns about potential political influence within the military.
It does.
Which brings us back to those issues of transparency and accountability.
Exactly. It's crucial that the TNI remains a professional and apolitical institution serving the nation's interests rather than any particular political agenda.
Absolutely. Now let's circle back to that CSIS report on misinformation.
Okay.
What stood out to you from their findings?
Their emphasis on the role of media workers in spreading misinformation was really striking.
Yeah. It is a bit unsettling to think that those who are supposed to be informing the public are actually contributing to the problem.
It highlights how pervasive this issue has become and how even those who should be most aware of the dangers can be drawn into it.
And the fact that they mentioned specific examples like the rumors about Jokowi's college diploma,
Right.
or the false narratives surrounding the possible election postponement, it makes it all the more real.
Absolutely. These are just a few examples of how easily misinformation can spread and the kind of damage it can do.
It reinforces the need for critical thinking and media literacy.
Yeah.
We can't just passively consume information. We need to question what we see and hear, especially online.
Because, as we've seen in today's interconnected world, misinformation can have real-world consequences impacting everything from elections to national security.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, but before we wrap things up completely,
You have one more thought-provoking question for our listeners.
you know me too well.
Oh.
We've talked about the threat of misinformation and the need for vigilance, but here's something to really chew on. What if the biggest threat to Indonesia's security isn't a terrorist group or a foreign power,
Okay.
but rather the erosion of trust in its own institutions?
That's a powerful question to consider.
It is.
And one that's relevant not just for Indonesia, but for democracies around the world.
Because if people lose faith in their government, their media, and their fellow citizens, it creates a fertile ground for instability and conflict.
And it makes it all the easier for those with malicious intent to exploit those divisions and undermine the very fabric of society.
So as you reflect on this deep dive, we encourage you to think about the role of trust in security.
Okay.
How can Indonesia, and indeed all of us, rebuild and strengthen that trust in an era of increasing uncertainty and polarization?
It's a question that deserves our careful consideration.
It really does make you think.
Yeah.
We've examined the potential threats to Indonesia's security, from terrorists lurking online to the delicate dance of international alliances.
Right.
But what if the most dangerous enemy is something far more insidious? A loss of faith in the very systems that are meant to protect us.
That's a chilling thought.
Imagine a society where people no longer trust their government, their media, even each other.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for chaos, a breeding ground for instability.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes this deep dive so important.
Yeah.
We've gone beyond the headlines, sifted through reports and social media chatter to understand the multifaceted nature of security in Indonesia today. You've seen how counterterrorism efforts are evolving in the digital age.
Yeah.
How the military is adapting to a world of shifting alliances.
Right.
And how even seemingly routine personnel changes within the TNI can raise questions about political influence.
True.
And we've explored the insidious threat of misinformation, how it can take root and spread like wildfire, eroding trust in institutions and sowing seeds of discord. Remember those examples from the CSIS report, like the rumors surrounding Jokowi's college diploma?
Yeah.
Or the fabricated stories about election postponements?
Right.
It's a stark reminder that we can't just passively consume information.
Yeah.
We need to be critical thinkers.
Absolutely.
Questioning what we see and hear, especially online.
Right. Because at the end of the day, security isn't just about military might or intelligence gathering.
No.
It's about building a resilient society.
Yeah.
One that's founded on trust, transparency, and a shared sense of purpose.
Exactly. And that's where you come in. As we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
we challenge you to think about the role you play in safeguarding Indonesia's security. How can you contribute to a culture of trust? How can you be a discerning consumer of information, helping to stem the tide of misinformation?
Important questions.
Because ultimately the strength of a nation lies not just in its armies or its borders,
No.
but in the hearts and minds of its citizens.
Very true.
Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. Until next time, we wish you well on your own deep dives into the complexities of the world around us.
Take care.
Yeah, it really does. It makes you think about how security is more than just, physical defenses.
It is.
It's about society itself and the trust that holds it all together.
Right. And when that trust starts to fray, that's when vulnerabilities appear.
Right.
Those vulnerabilities can be exploited.
Exactly. So we've explored some potential threats to Indonesia's security today.
We have.
From online radicalization and misinformation to those shifting dynamics within the military.
It's a good reminder that we can't get complacent. You
Yeah.
know, we need to stay informed.
Yeah.
Be critical of the information that we're consuming.
Right.
And actively engage in these discussions about these issues.
Absolutely. And that's what this deep dive is all about. We've gone deep into official reports.
Yeah.
We examine military developments, and we even analyze social media trends.
Trying to get the full picture.
Exactly, to provide you with a comprehensive understanding of what the current security landscape looks like in Indonesia.
And we've seen how counterterrorism efforts are adapting to this digital age.
Right.
With the BNPT grappling with this surge in online extremism.
Right. And while the decline in physical attacks is encouraging,
It is.
the online battleground presents a whole new set of challenges.
For sure.
Remember those numbers the BNPT released? Over 10,000 pieces of terrorist content online.
It's a lot.
And the fact that a significant portion of that is targeting women and children
Yeah, it's concerning.
raises serious concerns about the potential for radicalization.
It is.
It's a reminder that online security is just as crucial as physical security.
It is, absolutely. And it's not just about countering terrorism either.
Right.
We've seen how misinformation can erode trust in institutions and completely undermine social stability.
That CSIS report was a real eye-opener.
It was.
The fact that they found evidence of media workers spreading misinformation.
Yeah, that was alarming.
It's pretty concerning.
It is. It underscores the importance of media literacy and critical thinking.
For sure.
You can't just accept everything you read or hear at face value.
No.
You have to question sources, verify information, and be wary of those narratives that seem designed to inflame tensions or exploit divisions.
Speaking of navigating a complex world, Indonesia's military is also undergoing some shifts.
They are. Their recent joint exercise with India Garuda Shakti Chami 4, it highlighted the importance of international cooperation when addressing these shared security concerns.
And their first naval drills with Russia suggest a strategic broadening of alliances.
Yeah.
Maybe a move towards a more multi-aligned foreign policy.
It seems like Indonesia is really carefully balancing its relationships with different global powers.
It does.
Trying to maintain its autonomy in this increasingly polarized world.
And internally, there's been a shakeup within the TNI.
Yeah.
With the rotation of over 60 high-ranking officers.
It's a lot of change.
While this could be a normal process,
the
timing and scale of these changes, coupled with President Prabowo's focus on a stronger military, raise some questions.
They do.
About potential shifts in priorities and the possibility of increased political influence within the armed forces.
It's something to keep an eye on for sure.
It is. It's a reminder that security is a multifaceted concept.
Absolutely.
It's not just about military might or counterterrorism operations. It's about building a resilient society, strengthening institutions, and fostering a culture of trust and transparency.
And that's where you come in as we wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. If Indonesia is going to navigate these complex security challenges, both old and new,
Right.
what role do you think its citizens should play?
It's a question that deserves careful consideration.
It does.
How can citizens contribute to a more secure and stable Indonesia? How can they help strengthen those democratic institutions? And foster a society that is resilient to both internal and external threats?
Good questions.
These are questions we all need to grapple with, not just in Indonesia, but everywhere in the world.
I agree.
Because in this interconnected age, security is not just the responsibility of governments and militaries.
No.
It's a shared responsibility that requires the active engagement of every citizen.
So as you continue to explore these themes, remember to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay vigilant. The future of security depends on it.
Yeah, it's a call to action for everyone to be, informed and engaged and really be proactive in safeguarding our societies.
And it starts with understanding that security, it's multifaceted. It's not just about physical borders and military strength.
Right.
It's about the institutions, the communities, and the trust we have in each other.
Absolutely. And we've seen how Indonesia is dealing with all these security challenges, right? From the rise of online extremism to the potential for political influence within the military and the spread of misinformation.
It's a lot.
It is a lot.
And each of these challenges needs a different approach, right?
Yeah.
Different solutions. But there's a common thread.
Yeah, what's that?
The need for vigilance, critical thinking, and a commitment to those democratic values.
Okay, let's go back to some of the key takeaways from our sources.
Okay.
That BNPT report on the surge in online terrorist content.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that the battleground has shifted. Over 10,000 pieces of content online. A big chunk of that targeting women and children.
That's a serious number.
It is.
It highlights the need for a more comprehensive approach to counterterrorism. One that addresses both the physical and digital aspects of that threat.
Right.
Governments, tech companies, civil society, they all have to play a part. Monitoring those online spaces, countering those extremist narratives, and supporting those who might be susceptible to radicalization.
And it's not just about reacting to threats.
No.
It's about building resilience.
Right.
That CSIS report on misinformation was really insightful. They pointed out how easily these false narratives can spread.
They do.
Especially with low digital literacy and when you have those political tensions.
Right. And the fact that they found media workers involved in spreading that misinformation, that emphasizes the need for stronger ethics in the media.
It does.
And it highlights how important media literacy is for everyone.
For sure.
We need the tools to evaluate information.
Yeah.
Spot the bias and tell what's real and what's fake.
Right. And that responsibility for security doesn't fall just on governments and institutions.
It does. Citizens have a big role to play.
They do.
Informed and engaged citizens.
Yeah.
That's the foundation of a strong and resilient society.
Right.
They can hold those in power accountable.
Yeah.
Challenge that misinformation and contribute to a culture of dialogue and understanding.
So to wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this: security is not some fixed thing. It's always changing.
It is.
It's a process that requires adaptation, innovation, and everyone working together.
Right. So stay informed.
Stay engaged.
Stay vigilant.
The future of security depends on it.